I think I had a most unusual situation in my family and in my early days at USC. I know you're supposed to go to school and learn there, and but I had the good fortune, especially good fortune, of having two brothers. The three of us are close. One is a psychiatrist, one is a labor lawyer, and both are graduates of the University of Chicago, and they got good backgrounds. My brother Gene was chief of psychiatry at Cedars for a number of years, and chief of the department at USC Medical School, and for a good number of years. And my brother David was senior attorney to Madam Perkins when she was the head of the Department of Labor, and he spent 16 years in government.
My gosh.
And it was really made to order for this job, and with the Jewish Committee for Personal Service and Gateways. I learned more from them than a school could ever hope to teach me.
Sure.
It's true I took on some of their prejudices, and therefore have controversial in some areas, but that's my background. To go back a little bit, beyond that, I come from a family of immigrants that came from Russia to avoid the injustices of the government, and particularly the anti-Semitism that they had to face, and the climate of the governance of the community, and they fled from it. My folks came here just short of 1900 in the 80s, 1890s, and I had two uncles that lived in Washington and Baltimore, and my mother came to them, and my father followed her up and married her. But what is interesting from a social work point of view, and what has had a great influence on her children, was my folks were very die-hard socialists, and they believed in the underdog. My mother particularly was a pacifist against any military form, whether it was Boy Scouts or whatever it was. And I was raised in that atmosphere. My mother, at the age of 8, was apprenticed to a seamstress, and she became a very fine seamstress, which has a tale to it that's talked a little bit about in that material. Mother was a very loving, caring, devoted Jewish mother in every
the best sense of the word.
Her children were sacrosanct. You messed with us, you messed with her. To illustrate it, my dad had to go to Europe on a business trip for his employer, came back with a Swiss Army knife, which he gave to my eldest brother, who went downstairs and started playing Mumbly Peg. You know that game where you flip the open blade into the ground?
Yeah.
And the gang around that part of Chicago at that time, which was not the nicest part of Chicago, gang leader took it away from him. And my brother ran up the 3 flights to our little flat crying. My mother grabbed a broom, went downstairs, just pointed him out to me, and she went after him and got the knife back. That typifies. And in later years, it also typifies when I was at Belmont. For some reason which I'll never understand, my mother detested contact sports, because from that you can get hurt. And she forbade us. So one brother was the chess and checker champion of the high schools in Chicago. Another one was very good in declamation and debating and that kind of thing. All of us were very dexterous in our physical things too. My brothers were excellent tennis players and whatnot. I was born a 7-month baby, and for the first year of my life, they didn't know whether I'd stay around or not. So contrary to the way my brothers were raised, my mother let me go to farm. You know, if I wanted to go out and play, she let me go out and play, and she encouraged me, and she fed me milk and malted milk. But if she knew I was playing baseball or soccer or football or basketball, and I went to all the subterfuges because I happened to be fairly adept at those things, and I played them. When it came to football, and I came into Belmont, I played on their football team, although I was about 138, 36 pounds, and we won the championship in the year 45, and it helped me get into school to USC. The first 2 years they paid for my tuition. The school gave me a scholarship. But to illustrate the story, the week of the championship game, my mother never knew I played football. And to her, I was a dead ringer for Miss Elman. Does that mean anything to you? A violinist, world-class violinist. And she saw that in me. And I would go and play football, baseball, whatever, and my fingers would get crippled up, and I'd come home. And as long as she heard the sawing on the violin, she was content. And she never knew anything about that.
That's cute.
Well, when I played football, the girl next door to me, literally next door, friend, their parents, of course, had hopes that we would someday marry or something. And I would bring my football togs home because they had to wash them every so often, and she would wash them. And when I go out in the morning, she'd say, "Hey, Lou," and I'd collect up my clothes and go. Well, on one such occasion, it happened to be the week before the championship game, my mother happened to come out of the house, and she saw me carrying the football tag. She says, "What's that?" Well, one thing, I never lied to my mother, but I did some things that are equally as bad. And I told her, and she said, "You're playing football?" Wait a minute. I was in the house. I'm going with you. Let's go to school. And I went to school, and Mr. Tritt was a kindly old man, the principal. And he liked me. And he says, "Louis, this is your mother?" "Yes." My mother says, "And you're Mr. Tritt, the principal?" He says, "And my son is playing football." I want to stop right now. He says, "Mrs. Ziskind, it's a championship game. The season is over. And they're expecting Lou to play. He's an important player to us." My mother says, "I don't care what, when, or why. I don't want my son playing football." And he saw the determination of my mother. My mother was about so, but she was not fat, but she was short, and he was tall. He was looking down, and she was looking up at him. She took her finger, and she says, "I want my son out of it." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, Mrs. Ziskind, if you feel that determined," he says, "we'll do it. Of course, he will not play, but if you should change your mind, please let me know." That started my mind thinking. Changed my mind. I knew I had as much chance changing my mother's mind as so I went home and I wrote me a note giving me permission to play. And I came back the next day and Mr. Tritt looked at me and he said, Lou, I'm not even going to read the note. I'm putting it in this drawer. If anything happens and your mother raises the question, then I have the note. And he said, you go ahead and play. Well, we won the championship. My mother never did know that I had a girl, I was smart enough to get a girl to sign the note because it had a feminine signature. But that's the kind of a mother she was.
Isn't that something?
At any rate, there was no question in my mother's mind. In Russia, they didn't encourage women to go to school, and also my dad had a good Jewish education, which is equivalent to high school in gymnasia in Russia, and he apparently was a good student. But
what'd your dad do again?
His folks had a mill, ground flour, and they worked with the farmers and the peasants. And they traded things, and Dad learned how to dress animal hair, hides and hair. You go to the concert, you may not be aware, but every bow in there is strung with horsehair. And so he dressed that, and he dressed for brushes and for all sorts of things. At one time it was very, very popular in our economy. But he was a skilled workman, but he didn't, until his retirement age, go into business for himself. He worked for a man, he built a factory for him, and he showed him how, and did the hiring and supervised the workers. But we were never affluent, but we were never poor. We never, I never had the luxuries that I saw at college when I saw my friends in it, but we never were wanting for anything. But I always knew that there was other explanations to human behavior. I would come home from school imbued with patriotism and the things that they told us in history about and my mother would look at me and she'd say, okay. She says, they're undoubtedly very good people, but she says there was starvation, there was child labor, there was this, that. Always pointed the other side of the picture to us. So, and one thing she was determined, above all else, we were going to get an education, whether we liked it or not. And she wound up by sending 3 boys through college, and there was no question about it. My brothers were bright, and they earned scholarships to the University of Chicago. I wasn't so bright, but I got a football scholarship for a couple of years.
That's pretty good,
Anyway, there were a lot of things that operated in my background that made me feel that destiny pushed me in a certain way. I was not a good scholar. First place, as I say, my mother let me roam because she wanted me to build up my health. Secondly, I had the problem of 2 brothers who were very bright ahead of me. I'd come into a class at the school, oh, you're Gene Ziskind's brother? And the expectations were there. And I get as mad as heck. And I did a lot of extracurricular activities. I had to lead in the senior play, and I did this and I did that at school. And I didn't pay attention to my setting. I was more out of class than I was in class. I really never learned to study properly until I got into college. There, I couldn't horse around, and I got down to business. Now, I didn't know of social work. It didn't mean anything to me. Matter of fact, I used to go to the Jewish Community Center in Boyle Heights, where we lived. I thought it was charity, and I wouldn't go in there, except when it came to playing basketball, and the guys wouldn't let me stay out of there. They came after me, and we did these things. But I had that feeling about the community, and my mother and dad were not church-going people. Their insight to life was, as they say, under oppression. My mother and dad joined the groups in Russia, were called intellectuals, where actually the women could get an education. And it was like a folks school. And they learned there. And but it imbued in mother this, my kids are going to get an education come what. And there was no thought of anything. We never had any other thought in our minds but that we were going to go to college. There wasn't an if, maybe. There's a Jewish word, there's efsher, which means maybe. Maybe to it. We knew we were bound for that. Well, my father had to dig up the expense for books, for clothing, all the things other than what the scholarships provided for two. By the time I came along, it was a little much to ask of him. But, so I worked most of my years at school. I went to school and I worked. And I didn't, as I said, I didn't know from social work. When I got my BS in education and finished my general secondary certificate, first thing I did was get married. Now you got to remember, this is in the height of the Depression. Jobs were no-nos. Couldn't find them.
This was like early 30s
yeah,
then?
the early 30s, when the SRA started. And I never was without work. Now, many times it went around my athletic abilities such as they were. I worked for a box manufacturer. I played on the baseball team. I was with the county in some work, and I played on their baseball team. You don't know it, but the county of L.A. was a retreat for ex-professional baseball players. When I used to cover Norwalk State Hospital, most of the attendants were former baseball players. They got too old to play baseball, and this was there. But they had a good league, and they had a good team, and I would get there. I coached some of the fire department basketball teams. I coached some of the police department basketball teams. Not always, hell, I knew from coaching like I knew from, but nevertheless, it helped bring bread to the table. So although my wife was a librarian, LA County Library, and she had a very interesting history about migrations to the United States and so forth. But between us, we did fine, you know. At any rate, she had a sister who was a social worker for the county. And Jess would around the dinner table, whatever, she would talk about her work. And so in a hazy manner, I knew there were people there that did good. No, didn't know too much about it. I got through in education in 31, no jobs. In the whole class, I graduated.
This was School of Social Work now.
No.
Oh, this is your
BS.
BS, yeah.
Bullshit, all right.
Yeah.
At any rate,
Yes,
the whole
20
class
years to graduate.
of guys that graduated in teaching, 2 got placed, no more. So I managed to pick up these odd jobs and work, as I say, and played baseball and whatnot. Every time I go up to Griffith Park, you see the, I'm going to say sanatorium, no, the stargazing part of it.
Oh, yeah, observatory,
planetarium,
planetarium, yeah.
I worked on the
Building
crew that was building that and putting in roads up there. And what was my job? I was timekeeper of the timekeepers. What did I do? I went over their sheets that they had to fill out for work, and I played baseball for them.
Oh my God. Isn't that fascinating?
At any rate, there is a lot of history, and I don't think it has anything to do with this, except
no, that's very helpful. I'm glad you're including it.
That
interesting.
One day I woke up, read the newspaper, and it said President Roosevelt, SRA, and work, social work. Well, they had a problem the minute they opened up SRA. Where were they going to get the people, the social workers, to do the job? There weren't enough of them.
Now, SRA was...
State Relief Administration.
Oh, okay.
And WPA, Works Progress Administration.
Yeah. Okay.
Overnight, they created the need for a tremendous number of social workers, and they weren't around. So anybody with a college credential could get a job. I got a job. A good friend of my sister-in-law was the head of the Highland Park office that opened up. And Francis and I were amongst those that were first hired to go there. The fact that the woman, who was I think a very good social worker, but she was a tyrant. As an administrator, she was really a Hitler. At any rate, she knew my family, she knew my brother who was a psychiatrist, so immediately she made me medical social worker. I didn't know nothing from social, hadn't heard the word, but I was a social. And it had a story to it. Those were the years when we had some very bad earthquakes in Los Angeles, some of the killer earthquakes. Wouldn't you know what happened at Long Beach and Compton? I was a medical social worker for those 2 areas. I went nuts. But at any rate, it was something. And
interesting.
Anyway, when I first did social work, I mean, from the very first day, when I hit that, I said, brother, this is for me. It was like love at first sight. This is what I wanted to do, help people. So I then made up my mind I was going to go back to school and get a credential. The MSWs had just come out in the very earliest days, but very few men had MSWs.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
And that's how I got my first big job.
Interesting.
I must say this, in my junior and senior years at USC, I worked in a settlement house in East Los Angeles.
Which one?
neighborhood settlement house.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, and that was right on Santee and 9th, right?
Huh.
Right there.
Nice and Santee, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful experience.
Huh.
I enjoyed it very much.
Isn't that great?
So that I sort of was primed all this prior
Yeah.
to me when I hit social work. I said,
Huh.
that's what I want to do.
Huh.
So I went back, and fortunately for me, because I was married, I had to work, do some work, and I was able to go to school. In addition, they permitted it then. I don't know if they do now. I don't think so. You get into
To
graduate
work and go to school?
Yeah.
Actually,
it's
I think
social
they
work.
still do have that.
Well,
yeah.
that is
Which
fine.
is very good, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent, yeah.
And it instead of getting it through in a year or two, it took me 4 and so forth.
Yeah.
But by that time, I had well corrected my study habits, and I did fare fairly well at it. And there are a tremendous number of experiences. That SRA was really something. We'd come to work in a day, and Miss Orange would come around and say, this is the last day. Come 4 o'clock, rescind that. Come back to work tomorrow. She herself was a very bright, brilliantly bright. She worked on a philosophy. I am fighting your battles. Therefore, you owe me the effort and the time to do the job right. And we would work overtime like you never would believe. And we did it without any extra pay. I mean, there was no overtime pay.
Yeah.
And we got all of $90 a month. And I didn't give a damn. If she could have paid me nothing, I would have enjoyed that work. You know? And I just sopped it up like a blotter sops up ink, you know. And I never wanted to go beyond a caseworking level. They wanted me to do this, go in training for supervising. I said, no, I want contact with people and see what I can do to help them. At any rate, the first job, real job, I worked with the SRA and WPA for 2 years, from 37 to 39, and a job came open at the Jewish Big Brothers. The son of the rabbi, who was a mathematical genius, left the job to go to MIT. In those days, it was the private agencies that were the premier agencies. The public agencies were considered, hardly beneath your servant. And they carried themselves that way. You know, you came in to apply for a job there, they looked you over upside and down, and I can tell you some very interesting experiences there. My brother was on the board of the Jewish Committee for Personal Service, and Dr. Aaron J. Rozanoff was on the board at that time, and the name may not mean anything to you, but he was one of the outstanding psychiatrists in America at the time when he introduced the convulsive therapies, the shock therapies, to America in New York. And then they brought them from New York to California to institute that in the... Now, my brother, Gene, who was also a very fine research worker, had heard about the convulsive therapies, and he went to Europe to see them. And he brought it to Los Angeles. He's amongst the earliest ones to bring it in. He did 2 things. He did it on that, and he did it on lithium for hyperkinetic activity. And Rozanoff became appointed head of the state hospital system, the mental hygiene department. He took Nathan Sloat from our organization to put in our program into the state level. It's the first time they brought in social workers. More than that, we had a very unique system. Our history was very unique in the sense that it did its work in the field. You didn't sit in an office and you came into the office. You went out to their family. It led to a lot of criticism of that technique because so many people said, what are you snooping? You go snooping in there. It wasn't snooping at all. You went in there and you met the family. And you came right down to the nitty-gritty of family problems. Poverty. Everything was bare there. We, as a matter of fact, if I were to be critical of the system today, I would say, hold on now. Social workers sold their birthright for a pot of garbage.
Garbage.
They left that method of operating, and he went into an office to act like psychiatrists, and they tried to take on all the actions and the information in those areas and gave up the being the family counselor. You know,
and reaching out.
Today you hear medicine, schools of medicine that have their doctors go and do family work, work with a numbered set of families, go into the family and everything. That's the thing that social work was par excellence instead of that. And still today, that is true. Any rate, that was a tremendous experience to me, going in. And of course I have funny stories as well. One of my first cases out of Highland Park office was a Green family. They had 21 kids on welfare, and I had to figure out the budget for them. I came there, and to my surprise, it was a black family. You know, you when a person gazes at you intently and over a period of time, you start getting nervous. You know, what's the matter with me? Did I forget? Did my fly open? Did I do this? What, you know? And so this guy was looking me over head to foot constantly. Finally, he looks at me and he says, "Are you Jewish?" And you know, there's the famous joke about it, that this happened in the movie industry, and they asked the writer, was he Jewish? He says, well, could be. He wasn't telling. So I didn't know what to say. I looked at him and I said, yes, I am. And he started speaking Yiddish to me. Pure, much better than I could speak.
Oh my gosh.
But I understood it, and I looked at him and I said, you know, okay. The old joke about that is the Jewish person sees, it's on the bus riding, and he sees a colored person reading the forwards, the Jewish paper. And he looks at him and says, you Jewish? He says, what, I need double trouble? Anyway, I'm standing there, and I say to the guy, well, how come? He says, well, I was raised by a Jewish family in the Bronx, Orthodox Jews. And he says, although I was never converted, he says, I was in a family that spoke Yiddish all the time, and the grandma and the grandfather and everybody was in it. And, another thing,
that's quite a story.
I'm sitting minding my own business in my office, and I heard one of the workers say, gee, I got a file of deaf, clients. He says, I don't know what to do. I don't sign language. I don't. I said, weren't you ever a Boy Scout? I says, well, I never got to be a Boy Scout, but I went through their manual and I learned A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. While I was signing, the supervisor walked by. She says, Ziskind, you know sign language? I said, well, this sign language I know. She says, you're getting a load now of deaf.
Yeah.
And I said, gee, it isn't that I would love it, but I don't want. Why saddle them with some guy like me that doesn't know their problems and their whatchamacallit? Go down to the Elysian Park, that's alongside of the LA River bed there. I forget, Highland Park, I think they call it, whatever it is.
Okay.
And here's your first assignment. Let them know that you're their new social worker. So I go down to the park. It's not a big park. It's one of these very small parks. Nobody's in sight. Nothing.
Nobody's there? Or?
Nobody's there.
Yeah.
Not even people in the park, that would normally be in a park. So I look around. I walked over to the riverbed. Nothing's there. So I decided I'll go back to the office. And as I'm walking back to the office, I noticed on a couple big trees the utensils, the axes, the shovels, rakes were, up against the trees. And I said, well, I don't think the city's giving them away. Let's see where that leads me.
On, yeah.
So I went back to the riverbed, LA riverbed, but I didn't. I went downriver instead of upriver. Sure enough, there were my guys. What were they doing? They were taking the rocks that accumulate in a riverbed and taking it to one side, the other side of the bed. So the minute I started to sign, they all grabbed around me and. But it's a long. If you have to spell out each word with this sign, by the time you get a sentence out, you're tired.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was the most interesting experience I had. I didn't have the time to learn sign language, but at that point I might have become a specialized worker, but I didn't. But the people were terrific in their eagerness and their humanity was so terrific that I enjoyed it. So actually, by the time I got into Jewish Big Brothers, I applied for that opening, and they said, you have a master's degree? I said, no, but I'm going to school, and I showed them the courses that I was taking. He says, you got the job. When you get out of school, the one condition is you give us at least a year's work when you get your master's, or 2 years' work. And I said, well, if I like the work, you have it hopefully for as long as you want it. And then I found it a very unusual learning experience. My predecessor, as I told you, was a brilliant guy in mathematics.
Now, were you taking the leadership of the agency?
No.
You were coming
I
on
was a
as staff.
caseworker.
I see.
And he gave me a caseload. I got the job on a Monday. Monday night was his last day. So I looked at the things and I took them home. I took the caseload home. And I read all the cases and I saw. And he was very opinionated. The word may be bad because I'm not saying it in a bad connotation.
I see.
He's a person who came to decisions. He was decisive.
Decisive, yeah.
And
Yeah.
he had analyzed his cases, and he had talked about prognosis based purely on their records. And most of these kids had been in juvenile court. And I spent most of my time in juvenile court representing these kids and proposing to handle their cases, and the court would then assign them to us. Well, it was fun. Pardon me. It was funny, when I read the case records, I didn't come to the same conclusions he had. Not a single one.
Gosh.
And I thought to myself, well, here's a bright guy, and I don't know nothing. And I'm in here, and I'm being critical of him? Crazy. So, my brother thought that's going to be a good lesson for me. He says, well, you read the cases, see the people, and you give us a plan of treatment and a prognosis on it. Let's see what you come up with.
Yeah. Which
I did over a period of time. And I lived long enough to see these kids and their children when they married, and to see that our prognosis
was right. Right on the money,
No, it wasn't right.
Oh.
No, exactly the opposite.
Oh,
Some of the kids that we had prophesized were doomed to wind up in the penitentiary. Became doctors and lawyers and teachers. That taught me a lesson.
Interesting.
Don't be so goddamn judgmental.
Yeah.
It's good technique for working with people.
Yeah.
You then can measure your work, at least in your opinion, what's happening.
Yeah.
And you have some evaluative tools that were really not taught in schools of social work.
Yeah.
And I began following the medical model of look for the earliest signs, look for the course of development and the flowering of symptoms, and confirm your diagnosis of those symptoms. Either you confirm it one way or another. And then all your diagnoses while you're handling the case are all tentative. None of them are firm. Till you're through with the case and you can look backwards and you firm up what your things are. So each experience was really very learning to me. Now, then I went from there to my first administrative post. I worked with kids in juvenile court and juvenile delinquents. Not the same type of delinquency that you have now. Entirely different thing. The community that I worked in was poor, but it was not crime-ridden.
Yeah.
You didn't have the gangs. The violence was missing.
Yeah.
And, stories just crop out of me. There was a Jewish family, widowed woman, and she had 4 or 5 kids, poorest church mouse. He came into their house and their living room was barren of furniture. No rug on the floor, no nothing. One thing was in the room, up against the wall, a shiny, brand new refrigerator. And she was a harried lady, because the kids were really giving her a massive workout. And I got them to join the clubs at the community center and things like that, and things that helped her do things. In that same block was a church that proselyted Jews. I tried to get Jews converted into Judaism. I don't know how to say this. It's nothing to do with my own feelings. I'm just trying to be descriptive. In the Jewish community, I think they would have welcomed Hitler rather than to have a proselyting group around, you know.
Yes.
Now, I became aware that this lady was going to the general hospital. Her kids were sick, and she was there much of the time. And we became aware that what they did was they tried to get the kids, organize them into choirs, then go out to hinterlands like San Bernardino and Pomona and in and around that. And the kids would sing at church, and the church would make a donation.
Now, is this the outfit that's trying to convert them?
Yeah, that was their method of operating.
Oh.
So one day I dropped in at the home and for the appointment, and the mother was at the hospital, and there was a worker from that proselyting in the house, and he had no use for social workers, and Jewish social workers certainly had no use for it. And he starts trying to proselyte me. You know, the Bible says this and that and the other thing. And he took the right guy. Because my folks always felt that organized religion was the opiate of the masses. And they taught us that. And so, you know, and here I go to work in a Jewish community with anyway, this woman came home after the church worker left, and I said to her, you know, this is so-and-so. How can you do this? I mean, what do you mean you let your kids go?
That's got it.
Mr. Ziskind, it's a practical matter. She says, is there anything in the Jewish community that will call for me in the morning, take me to the general hospital, and when I'm through, come and pick me up and take me home? She says, look at me, I'm an old lady. I've been cut up open like a chicken, she says, graphically. And she says, and I'm a sick woman and I need the care. So he says, there's nothing. She says, would you come and get me and take me in the morning? You know, you're right up against it then. Yeah. Where does your social work come in then?
Yeah, gosh.
At any rate, there are these stories by the Jones.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
And you know, when you go into the home, you see these things. You miss it sitting in an office. You don't.
Oh, that's right.
You know.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
At any rate,
yes.
Now I got off one of those tracks and I don't know how to get back.
That's very important because I remember, I'll tell you over lunch, that's some stuff that fits right with that.
Incidentally,
when do we want to break?
Doesn't matter to me. I can talk and talk and talk you to death. So
well, maybe you want to go another 10 minutes and then...
All right, then we'll have lunch and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
Well, so much is for the influence of family. To me, it was all empowering. I had one difference with my mother, whom I love dearly, and that was I had wished that she had raised her kids so that they made their own determination about the amount of religiosity they wanted to have. It isn't that I would do things differently, probably would not, I do not know. But at least it would have been my choice. When I had my kids come along, I had the decision to make. And I went through the traditional ways with them. About halfway through, they looked me in the eye and said, Dad, you weren't bar mitzvahed. You didn't belong to a temple. Why are you driving us to it? We don't want to go.
That's interesting.
To make it even more interesting, who was my boss then? Rabbi Edgar F. Magnan.
Oh my God.
Was president of the board.
Yeah, he's right up there. Yeah,
Yeah, he
oh,
was.
My goodness.
He was.
That's
He was a remarkable,
my
remarkable
dad
person.
respected him so much. He
I
thought
had
the world of him. Yes.
Tremendous respect for him,
Yeah.
but he was a rich man's rabbi. He was not a poor man's rabbi.
Yeah, I think that's
And
right.
he was the representative Jew to the non-Jewish community in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah.
And he said so many bright things to me when I first came there, and I didn't know anything. Now that's another thing about the schools of social work. They don't teach you anything about administration. Nothing. Zilch. And here I come up and an agency is put in my hands, and what do I know about running it? So Magnan was very charitable with me. He liked me and I liked him. And the first bit of advice I remember at the moment, Louis, you're going to talk to this group of women? Let me give you a bit of advice. Think before you go there of 2 or 3 points that you want to make. No more. Go there, make them, stop, get out of there.
That's pretty good advice.
That's damn good advice.
Yeah.
I followed it many a time. And many a time I got into trouble because I didn't.
That's great, yeah. That's good.
Anyway, don't misunderstand me. I have a great deal of respect for what I learned at USC. And there were some terrific people there. The Bogartises, the Earl and Young and Pauline Young, remarkable people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in that sense, I feel grateful to SC. There are other things that I did not like and experiences that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a course from Dr. Alexander, the psychoanalyst.
But that wasn't Franz, was
Franz.
it? Oh, was it Franz Alexander? Oh, my God.
My brother was trained in the biological school of psychiatry. And whereas he respected the Freudian concepts, and he knew them well, he had great doubts about many things that they said. But of course, I inherited.
Yeah.
I'd go to school and hear the teacher. And, you know, I had my doubts, and I'd raise them, and most times they brushed me aside.
Yeah, probably.
Well, the first opening remarks of Franz Alexander was very interesting. Came into the classroom, said hello to the students. He said, I'm going to open up this course with a statement. He says, you're all bright, young, and eager. But he says, I don't want to have arguments with you. I'm stating up front. Where you agree with Freud, I agree with you. Where you disagree with Freud, I disagree with you. Let's not argue about it. When he gave me when we wrote the blue books for the final exam, I sent in 2 blue books. One I said, what you expect me to say, and what I believe on the next one.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Got back the blue books, and he gave me an A beside the point.
Okay.
But he wrote on there, you're a true disciple of Ziskind. Reziskind. Anyway.
That's interesting.
All right, let's go
All right,
eat.
well, we'll go eat. Well, that's fascinating. Wonderful.
So they started out, they said, well, we'll give you clerical help. They gave me a secretary, who was good. And they gave me an office, which I took over and built up myself, furnished it and whatnot. President of the board came along and said, "Gee, I like this office. It's a lot better than mine." And he
So we took it. Oh.
The secretary, I said, I'm writing about some concepts. It's not a finished product at all. And I don't want to show it to anybody until I get it congealed.
Yeah.
So if anybody asks you what this is all about, I want you to keep my privacy. She says, "I'll do it for everybody but the executive." So why? She says, "Well, the executive and the president." He says, "Those are the people I work for. I don't work for you." So I said, "That's terrific." I said, "I appreciate your candor,
Yeah.
and that's fine." I said, "If I need you again, I'll call you.
Yeah.
Don't bother me."
Yeah. That's too
And I
bad.
found also that when I was giving them work, if they were in the midst of a campaign, or if they had this or they had that, everything was given priority over my secretary. So I said, what is this?
Yeah.
It is no good to me, and it's no good to
Yes.
them. So
Yes.
I moved out of Gateways. I
Yeah.
do everything from home. It's difficult,
Yeah.
but then I choose what I do,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Yeah. That's too bad, though, that they didn't have a better spirit about it. Gosh.
Oh, the point I was going to make, unfortunately, we're not taught this in administration, but an administrator is like the conductor of an orchestra. He has to find out where his strengths and his weaknesses are in the supports group and the program group. And I used to marvel the way Dr. Samuels played the medical staff, like, it sounds like a manic depressive, give it to so-and-so, he's an expert in it. And he moved around amongst his experts, so the expertise that I didn't have, he supposedly had, and he used it. And therefore, we always got along regardless of what the specialty was. If a person came to staff that was a psychologist, a patient person came to staff who believed in finger painting as a treatment, and this one believed in music as a treatment modality, and this one, we said, fine, come and show us and prove it, and we'll help you all we can. And it always kept
Kind of appreciating people's unique talents.
And also making it available to others that don't even realize it exists.
Yeah, that's good.
So, we always had a far-ranging group of treatment approaches. My regret is that we weren't able to write up those that were good and those that were bad, and what was good about them and what was bad about them. With all the paperwork, with the government coming into the mental health field and the penal field, you just don't have the time for it. I sit now and I think, gee, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I say that? It's
Well, now, what is the status today of the, does the agency have papers that if you wanted to go and look at them, if you wanted to do writing, is that available to you or
I imagine it would be. I don't think they've gone so far as to turn that up. Some things did happen that probably my fault. I had no experience, so I didn't know enough to know that they could happen. When we moved from headquarters on Vermont Avenue to the present headquarters on Wilshire Boulevard of the Jewish Federation, they moved everything out of these headquarters, and they said, in essence, if you don't say otherwise by a certain date, we got to be out, so we're just going to move, and we're going to destroy all the records. There were 20-some odd 4-drawer steel cabinets full of records. We never destroyed a record. We kept it from day one. The incoming administrator to me when I left found he needed room for records. And the obvious thing was, and he destroyed them all. Didn't ask permission, didn't say anything, just destroyed them. Now to add to the handicap, I said I would do the history of the agency. The main office, our main office, we grew out of San Francisco. It was in San Francisco. And there, similar thing happened. They took on an administrator of the agency, a federation agency.
Are you talking about Jewish Federation now?
Yeah, the Jewish Committee for Personal Service up north. The Federation took on a bright young doctors of social work. A hell of a nice guy. He decided, when we looked over our programs, that we had to have a review in, I don't know, 50 years or whatever it was, that he would make a review, and he decided that we had outlived certain functions. I wish he had said something, because I would have liked to have rebutted it with him and discussed it with him. But they decided to merge our northern office, our San Francisco office, into the Jewish Family Service of San Francisco. And their board approved the action, and the United Way did, and the Federation did up north, so who are we to say no? It happened. They merged their offices, physical plant. Up came a case that I knew we had in Northern California years ago, a rather spectacular case, and I wanted our records on it. So I wrote up to the San Francisco office and asked for the record. Came back with the news that when they merged, they put their records together with the Jewish Family Service. Jewish Family Service didn't want their records to be polluted. They destroyed all the records. So here we are, an organization of all these years, and we have very few records to point to. And guys like me would be invaluable to them because we were there. We saw it. I'm the only one alive today that knew some of the old timers up there.
I'll bet.
And you know, and yet,
it's a shame.
When I asked the Jewish Family Service to make a search and really do it, now I'm going to go to United Way, and I want financial records that go back. They should have them from the time we started, 1919, and I ought to be able to get some data out of those. And I don't know what they'll tell me. And I know they're not going to say, oh yeah, come on in, and you know, they're going to probably want to get an okay from their board. They probably want to get to the accountants that did those records, and I don't know what, but I'm sure it's not going to be easy. Those are the things that when you dig up the past and the people are no longer there, you know, and it's too bad. And there are so many things that went on that are policy setting. They're wonderful things. Wonderful things. You know.
Can you speak a little about that?
It's hard.
I
think what we ought to do, if it's all right with you, and please don't let me guide this thing, I don't want to. But if you want to take a certain few subjects and meet on that, and then we'll exhaust that, and then we'll go to others, all right.
That's good.
And I'm available as long as you have the patience and endurance to last me out.
Okay, good.
So,
good. Yeah.
That can be my last contribution to Gateways and the Jewish Federation.
Yeah.
The Historical Society of the Jewish Federation has been on my tail to do it.
Good.
The Jewish, the Gateways has offered no financial help. When I say financial help, I don't mean to compensate me for my work.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to go up to San Francisco and Oakland and Sacramento and San Diego and spend the time that would take me to dig up things if I don't have some sharing about my hotel and my transportation expenses. And they say no, so fine.
Yeah.
Now the Jewish Historical Society says they have some funds that may help me if I want it. I don't want it. If I can get along without it, I will.
Sure.
And when I can't get along without it, it just won't be done. That's all.
Yeah.
I am not, unfortunately, of the financial stature that can leave them money. So I have my own responsibilities to family and grandchildren and whatnot.
Yeah.
Take care of.
Sure.
But,
makes sense.
but I really should go up to Oakland and San Francisco and Sacramento. Are we on?
Yeah, we're on tape. Yeah.
You may not know it, but I'm the bird that raised the question of the questionable practice of having religious groups in the penitentiaries and jails that are not qualified.
Good for you.
Thanks to Rabbi Magnet, as I discussed this with him. I used to get very disgusted. You go down in the county jail and there would be 67 different religious organizations, from the fundamentalists, the holy rollers, to what. I come in sometimes in the jail, they gave us an office behind the stairwell, and I would come in there and there were holy rollers rolling all over the floor and praying and whatnot. And I'd look at it and well, what has this got to do with... And Sheriff Biscalou said at that time, look, I welcome all the religious groups. They want to give me volunteers, I'll take them. And you all got to live with each other. Well, I don't have to tell you, the poor Protestant groups, I felt sorry for them because they were backbiting each other. There weren't enough Jewish groups to backbite each other. Anyway, a number of our leaders in our institutions, like our Chief Probation Officer, Carl Holton, Ken Scudder, the administrator at the California Institution for Men, our state penitentiary, their fathers were ministers. And they were raised in a deeply religious background. And Ken was brought up in the federal system. Generally speaking, my experience has taught me over the years that the farther you got away from local administration, the healthier the system was. The politics was still there, but it wasn't as intense as local. And our federal institutions, the federal criminal justice system, was much more liberal than the ones in the county. And I presume because in the county, every Tom, Dick, and Harry that lived in the community had a voice in it and would say his piece. As a federal system, you couldn't get it that way.
Yeah.
But their institutions are run better. Their institutions are built better. And generally speaking, most of the administrators they get were not only bright, but they were well trained. Most of them went to Princeton, Yale, Harvard, and got into divinity schools, and they're old schools with a lot of tradition and a lot of experience behind them. And when you got into Foursquare Gospel and this group and that group and this group that tomorrow would not be here, and you get into all sorts of crackpots. At any rate, I learned early how to get in and out of institutions. I learned early the admission policies and the discharge policies as well. I learned that it was more important to know what the practices were than what the policies were. As most times the practices and policies didn't get together too well. So when I approached an institution, the first thing I did was to convince these people that I'm not an egomaniac, that I'm not there to forward my career, that I'm not there to point out the criticisms of that institution and to take social action against them. When they felt comfortable with me around, then we were able to talk in logical performances. And I have many proud moments. I had moments when the parole adult authority and the juvenile authorities would call me into meetings to sit down and unofficially advise. They didn't know the social work communities. They didn't know the resources. They didn't know the linkage. They didn't know anything out there, and they wanted it. But you always have the problems in custodial institutions of outsiders coming in and interfering with your custodial effectiveness, you know. One of the things I think that is true is that you're not subject to the same discipline, supervision, and hierarchical command as a staff member is. They have to go up the steps of command. I can go right to the warden. I can go right to wherever it is. And my contention always was that the public staff plus the private agency staff is stronger than either of us are alone. The old-timers don't believe that. Most of the old-timers in the correctional system have come up through police work. And they're not always the best type of people to have around. But to get back to my original complaint, you don't learn any of that in the schools of social work. Now, if I was to be critical of USC today, I would say here is a beautiful opportunity that we're missing, we're not even looking at, no one wants to consider, but it is a very logical thing to do. We have a university of great renown, USC. We have a plethora of correctional institutions on all levels, juvenile, adult, city, county, state, federal, within our community, within minutes of one another. You don't have to go far to be there. And we have this great university that doesn't even have, as far as I know, a sequence of studies in the correctional field.
Probably right.
You cannot get a degree in correctional work here. You can in Berkeley, but you can't get it here. Again, I have to put in, as far as I know, I'm not that too familiar with it anymore. But just imagine what plethora of subjects we have to be studied right in our community that we ignore. We wring our hands with all the violence and all the tragedy that this population brings us, You don't face it and say, what can we do? And I got that when I was at the University of Utrecht, and I saw the Van der Hoen Clinic there, in which they had prisoners come from the country's prisons, murderers, all kinds of prisoners, housed in a dormitory on the campus of the University of Utrecht. And the only thing that divided that campus from the community outside was the street that surrounded it. Now, the families of these prisoners there could come and rent homes and buy homes close to the prison, and they were right there. You also have an incentive to make a prisoner behave and want to behave, because he wanted the privilege of at free intercourse with his family. And you held that out for their cooperation. But then you made it available to the social scientists, to the behavioral scientists. It didn't matter whether they were a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a physician. It didn't matter if they were an anthropologist or any of the behavioral science people would have access to that population. Not behind bars. They didn't have to go into a prison and be careful of the way they walked and where they went and what they said. These people were subject guinea pigs for their research. Of course, the research had to be supervised by the university to see that it was proper and everything. But we ignore it. Every day, every year passes and nobody does anything. You have a Atascadero State Hospital that was created as a hospital for the criminally ill. They have varying relationships with Berkeley, with a few of the other institutions, but again, not very, very good. Question of money comes up. What better investment is there to try and find out the sources of criminal behavior, how to handle aberrant behavior? They ignore it. There's no place. If I today wanted to get a degree in corrections, I'd either have to go to Berkeley, or Michigan is a fine place. The East, they have some fine places. You go off there to do it. But here in our own community, with everything around us so close, we don't do anything.
That's a sad commentary. Actually, Menninger was probably somebody that I suspect you got a kind of equivalent concern from, or what would you say?
Well, no, I certainly respect Menninger, and there are many private educational institutions, and very fine ones. John Hopkins does good work in it. The other thing that I say, they don't equip us, as I say, to go out and do administration. We could go into other sequences of courses, like public administration. You can go on to, but it's not the same. And how to operate a non-profit basis, how to operate,
that's really something.
Get some skill in fundraising, some direction. I walked into a group of family members of people in prison. We tried to have that for a while. It was too difficult for us, but we tried. We got these family members together, and I had a point in mind and slipped out.
You were referring to you were referring to administration for one thing, and what's
these family members came and asked me to sit in with them because they were running into difficulties about status and stigma, and they were quarreling amongst themselves. And I came to a couple of those sessions, and again, I was so busy, but nothing equipped me for that. You know, I felt like I kept looking for things, and as I say, I would go to seminars, I would go to meetings where they talked about administration, always seeking what were the secrets in it, what was I doing that I shouldn't be doing, and what wasn't I doing that I should be doing.
Yeah.
And there was no help from school.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Now, if they're going to do continuing education, I'm looking over the material that comes to me. I see nothing in the correctional field. The whole field has been ignored. Well, I shouldn't say that. Substance abuse is the only thing I see in it.
Yeah. But it's very little. You're right.
It's very little.
From what I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
you're right. Very little. And often I don't think, well, there was a period where it seemed like there was, a number of initiatives in preventing, early intervention with juveniles, for example, before they really get, but even that's kind of,
I was warned by a person that I had tremendous respect for. He had one of the private treatment facilities in New York into Queens. It was run primarily by the psychoanalysts. And at that time, we had never taken on juveniles at Gateways. And I decided I wanted all age groups, children, juveniles, early adults, middle adults, and the aged. And I planfully tried to get each section. I never was successful in getting anything in the children's area. Primarily, there was no money involved. I had, twice in my lifetime, I had plans for things that I felt were very important that at the last minute died because the people that were my main supporters died accidentally and in accidents. Gateways would have been developed 10 years earlier, but one of my chief financial supporters died on a trip to New York. And I was told by the people in the East that had specialties in adolescent care, there is nothing as destructive to an organization as an adolescent program. Don't go into it if you're only going to go into it for a year or 2 or 3, because it takes longer than that to make the changes in adolescence, number 1. And 2, if you build your institution like a concrete fortress, you might be there in 3 years. Because he says if it's anything less, within a year or 2, you'll have to rebuild the institution because adolescents will take it apart. There is nothing as destructive to staff because it creates problems amongst staff of who did what and what the effect and cause was. Think twice before you go into adolescence. And I did. I didn't try to go into adolescence because I was afraid of it. Finally came the time when we had some money and we had the desire to want to do the adolescents, and we opened it up. And we found that most of those things were true to a lesser extent than was reported to me, but nevertheless were true. That it created dissension on staff, and primarily because the behavior of the adolescents.
Well,
we had a one-story building with an addition of a second story for part of the roof area. Wouldn't you know that we were catching our adolescents escaping, not through the door. The door was there, they could have walked out. They had to go from window to window to roof to window. I could tell you stories you wouldn't believe. You just couldn't believe it, you know.
So they didn't choose to just walk out the door, they had to go through a window out with the roof.
That was also true with developing thrift shops as a fundraiser. That's nothing that as much as a destructive force to your organization as a thrift shop. Very simple explanation. Molly and Jessica are volunteers sitting in a thrift shop. There are 2 times in the day when it's just a special importance. When the donated materials arrive, that you get a fresh look at what comes in, and when they leave, because you have an entire... Number 2, thrift shops attract dishonest people. They come to work because it is work, and they find ways to be compensated. Very simple now, I'll tell you how. Molly is there, and Jessica are there at the time the truck comes in. They look over the things, and Molly says, "Gee, just what my son needs. He just got married, and he needs a dining room set. There's a dining room set. Beautiful."
So there goes
she
the dining room
calls.
set.
No, they don't. Not that group.
Yeah.
She calls her son. Son comes in. "Oh, Mom, terrific." Now they are in charge of pricing things too, the staff. So Molly turns to Jessica and says, "You know, I want to buy that. What would you charge me for it?" And Jessica says, "Well, it's worth $500 easy. Probably pay $1,000 to get the chairs and the, yeah." Well, they can't afford it. They're just young married people. Well, what can you afford? Well, I'll give you $50.
I was going to say, I bet that's what happened.
Can't sell it that. But can you give $100? Now comes the part. So now tomorrow, in comes a load of things, and Jessica sees a fur coat that was sold originally for $8,000 10 years ago. Today it's worth maybe $150, $200. She says, "That's my Maggie at home would be terrific with that." Now, what do you think? What did you charge for that? Well, or she may even say, "Well, I already have a price offered of $200 on that." And I told him it was too low. She says, "But I'll give it to you for $200. No. She says, "I just gave you a furniture down, and I brought it down to so-and-so, the reciprocal case." And so you have that kind of thing going on. Or you'll have a board member come in who has properties. He has apartment houses. And he greets that bus and he says, "I want that bed and that table and chairs and this and that, and get it all together." And he takes off the cream of the crop.
Yeah.
and it gives you very little for it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I bet that happens, yeah.
Then you have the people who are really weak characters. Comes through and there's in the knickknacks, there are some antiques that they recognize and know the value of. And they'll get together with the other employees and say, you know, I can sell this for this, and buy it very cheap and sell it and give a portion of it to each one that's involved in the transaction.
Yeah.
I have had wealthy women whose husbands were very successful in business get caught stealing things from the thrift shops.
Oh.
And the shame in front of the neighbors. The husband comes rushing out, what's it, well, how much is it? It's worth $500, here's my check for $500. And another 100 for... And the first thing you know, the two lifelong friends, Molly and Jessica, aren't speaking to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it starts breaking up your organization. So it's not without its other side, you know.
Okay.
And what do you do with a woman who goes to and is sent to jail for theft in a thrift shop, or even in a department store going and shoplifting?
Sure, sure.
And I've met them, and it's a pitiful object, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Social work schools do not
cover those things.
Cover those things, and they're needed to be covered.
Yes, yes.
No,
you're right. Well, it's a good example of where alumni could be very helpful if they were to really use them more actively, I bet you. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying very much, and I think the school has a right to expect help from its alumni. They've made a big contribution in their lives. But unfortunately, not all of us are in a position to be financially helpful.
Sure.
Also, to those of us that had to work when we went to school, we earned the money the hard way. And we don't have that kindly feeling that we would have had we had free education.
Sure, sure.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking in terms of really developing better ways of making, inviting people to come back and even compensating them, for heaven's sakes, to share some of their wisdom. I don't know that this is done.
Yeah, well...
And it's too bad, because there is a lot of accumulated experience out there.
See, it seems to me, Ed, that depends on what time of life you're in. If you're in your middle life, then you have your biggest time of strength, financial acquisition of things.
Yeah.
You can expect one thing. When you get to your senior citizens and your retirees, who are now able to live like I can my life very nicely. I wish I could have lived as well at various times in my life before.
Me too.